where do you want India to be in the global esport ecosystem in 10 years from now? And how do you get there?
3, 2, 1, go.
Hey lads, usually we don't do any intros because it's just not been a thing. We just get cracking with the show. But today's guest calls for it. He is an esports legend, one of the most decorated players in the history of the game, Counter-Strike, and somebody that Romeo and I, we personally looked up to back in the days when we were competing as well, who also happens to be the co-owner of Fnatic and the chief gaming officer. And if you don't know, if you've never heard his name, then you're probably living under a rock. He is none other than Patrik Sättermon. Patrik, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for the super kind words. And I'm pretty sure you don't have to live under a rock to not know who I am. It's been a while since I was somewhat relevant, but I'm still sporting a Fnatic cap. I have a seat share. That was not a marketing plug, by the way. But yeah, I'm very ingrained and incorporated in Fnatic and have been almost since its inception. But it's been now roughly 10 years since I competed, and a lot of water under the bridge since. A lot of new titles, even a new segment, which is mobile esport, more or less, right? So, yeah, no worries. But yeah, nice introduction. Very, very, very thankful for the nice words. I'm happy to be here.
It's a pleasure.
So, Patrik, I remember, right, when it was back in the golden age of 1.6. I mean, come on, like I pretty much learned most of my Counter-Strike strats from you guys. I still remember watching your retirement interview with HLTV, and I remember you did mention that it was. I feel if you compare things to now with the current timeline, I think you did mention somewhere that it was much more easier to dominate back then. Do you think that's like how do you compare that now, like with the current esports scene? Like, do you think it's easier to dominate now or compared to your
I think
time?
I think it's very easy, and I think same goes in every kind of business, industry, or sports, that it has a certain growth element. Even if that growth element is like 1%, over a few years' time, become exponential. It becomes harder. That's what I'm trying to say, maybe in a too complicated way. Looking at the CSGO ecosystem now, in just a quick comparison to what was CS 1.6, that's 11, 12 years ago, where sure, you still have those kind of Astralis eras, and they ran it for quite a while. You had Fnatic CSGO perhaps in 2015, going kind of back-to-back 5 events, winning 2 majors over a quite short time frame. But I think the world is now kind of, and it's a lot of kind of mechanism and stuff underneath that. It's not only the just fact that there might be more players, there's more on stake, there's also more entrepreneurs, there is new discoveries in terms of what actually fosters success. Back then, you can also say, and that comes to the kind of amount of team brands or entrepreneurs, there were few big organizations, or even medium-sized organizations that could kind of provide conditions, and that maybe gravitated the absolute best to one place. League of Legends probably had that in the beginning. I think there was a point of time, and I'm not going to go in a ranking moment here and like top lane to bot lane and say, yeah, that was top 3, top 4. That's the case now. What I'm trying to address is maybe when we were super dominant in League of Legends, as an example, we perhaps had, from a pure skill set standpoint, the best player in every lane in a sense, and that's a bit tougher to have now. The short answer is that, yeah, of course, it's harder today because it's more competitive. There's more stakeholders. We will still have some of those dominant eras. There's other elements. Just throw it into the mix, right? Like PUBG Mobile. Not to say it's a random game, but it's a tougher game to predict in terms of the kind of random elements of the game. And that's probably also why you don't see like 5 chicken dinners in a row, right? But you probably see 5 major victories in a certain esport title, like, yeah, whatever. But yeah, the short answer, Romeo, to your question is that it must surely been easier back then. And maybe like local benchmark for you guys in the local sports you have, be it like cricket or local football, whatever you have, there was probably those teams like winning season after season after season after season. And maybe now it's more a trading game. Looking at Premier League in football here in Europe, for example, it's a little bit the same, right? I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know what you guys feel about that topic, but yeah, it's a competitive world, and gradually more so.
I do agree with, but I think the question here was really when we go way back. Right? I still remember you had an interview with Thorin. I think it was about 10ish years back when I think you were still competing. I don't remember it correctly, but you mentioned that between 2003 and 5, a lot of teams could not actually afford to travel, as a matter of fact, because there was not a lot of money involved. So there was a lot of local domination going on. So obviously there was a thing which made it harder for players to compete because they just did not have the money to support themselves,
Yes.
which made it easier for local teams to dominate. But at the same time now, when there is so much money flowing in, there are conditions. You talked about the environment. There is an environment which supports the players in terms of traveling, playing, competing across the globe, not just in their own region. And I think this is where the question stems, right? Because while it's easier for you to compete in different regions, but at the same time, it's also improving the quality of the game that is being played. And with respect to that, was it easy to dominate back in the day?
Not sure if I fully understand the question. You talk about the opportunity for an individual player to go professional in a sense. So just the sheer amount of teams and players, or can you maybe rephrase the question so I understand?
So in simple,
because I've kind of felt like you said the same thing. I kind of
no, I think so. Yeah,
that wasn't a joke. I was just my interpretation was that you kind of aligned with what I said.
I do, as a matter of fact, I do. But here's the thing, right? For a lot of new players right now, they don't it's hard for them to compare the opportunities they have now and the opportunities that were present.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
That were present back in the day. And also at the same time, it's harder for them because while there are opportunities, there's a lot more competition as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I capture what you mean now. So when you got through that filter of getting your mouse pad sponsor or a ticket to a LAN party or a qualification spot to WCG, following that, it was a bit of an avalanche effect that it became a bit easier in the sense because you were one of the lucky few.
Yes.
Traveling a bit backwards, was it hard to go pro at an early era of competitive esports? Think about the Unreal Tournament days, Quake, etc. Yeah, it was a few amount of pro orgs and pro players, but to take that step, like I'm gonna tell my parents that I'm gonna take a gap year in school, or I'm gonna sacrifice all of these things. I'm not gonna take a higher education going to university because I'm gonna play, let's say, StarCraft. That was way tougher because you actually did something, you pioneered something no one had done before in a sense, to a point that in my case, actually, we talk about esports, like it's been there forever in terms of like just the phrase and the context of esport. But at that point, it was kind of like video games, PC gaming, I'm a gamer, I play computer games, digital sports, whatever have you. In other words, it wasn't an established thing. You didn't, how to say, it wasn't like a choice in this. Well, it was a choice, but it kind of stemmed out of maybe a mixture of like being a digital citizen at an early age and an early adopter to like technology, getting access to broadband. Classic male stubbornness, because the most pros even back then was males, right? Playing Quake, Unreal Tournament, etc. Just like, I really want to do this and I only want to do this, and you suddenly climb whatever ranking. But again, it wasn't like I didn't become, how to say, people grow up now looking at role models and kind of be able to say, I want to be that guy and I want to be pro because that guy is pro, earnings, prize money wins, being a part of organization, content, YouTube channel, all of those things. But that, again, didn't exist. So you kind of pursued something that purely stemmed from passion in the sports. I'm saying esports again, right? But just the love for the games and to organize competitive games and to kind of scale that. And then obviously people that didn't take maybe that direction in terms of like, I'm going to focus on I'm going to focus on the player side, just becoming a better player, joining a better team, etc. Clans, essentially, what it was called back then.
Yeah.
They maybe went on to create an ESL or a DreamHack, or they created the future success stories like Riot Games and other game developer and publishers, right? So a lot of things kind of happen at the same time. And looking back now, maybe 12 years or so, that's when we started to really talk about esports and talk about different stakeholders like TOs, game devs, teams, organizations, player associations, obviously a bit more recently. But all of these things have happened in a quite short time span. So ultimately, it's hard to really conceptualize what you got into back then versus what you get into now. And that comes, I guess, and I'm not here to bring I'm here to bring ethics, I hope, because I rely on that and values in my work and how we run teams and how I act but I'm not here to kind of preach in a sense, right? But I see different kind of traits and what have kind of maybe been accelerated in terms of like you joining the fray now. Like I download this game, it's starting out with 100K prize pool. Every player gets a certain salary perhaps, and they get boot camps, all those things. And I almost wonder at times, but that's life, and that things goes too fast in a sense that you go from nowhere to somewhere very quick, and then suddenly it's important to maybe have a YouTube channel. So what I'm kind of trying to address that the immense growth of opportunities and how fast things are scaling now. Again, mobile esports is a great example. India and PUBG Mobile is also a great example where it's kind of like, assuming we believe in Big Bang, it's like nothing to something in a very short time, and it just explodes. But I guess now we're here a bit in the aftermath after speaking about water under the bridge in the terms of like, Fnatic entered, Fnatic left. I mean, at some point we're going to return. The title was banned, now back in a different shape and a different color. And picking up the pieces and maybe now thinking more holistically, right? Like, what are we actually building here, and starting to kind of define things again right now? Because again, it's I mean, you know way better than I, obviously, but I can just see some differences in terms of like kind of player traits and opportunities and what that makes out of people in a sense, which is quite interesting, because I come from a generation where it was just endless of passion in the game, probably even more so passion in the competitive side and getting out there on something called the internet that very few enjoyed from a kind of competitive gaming standpoint. Whereas today, it's very different, but it's in a short interview, and I speak too long already, it's hard to kind of make fully sense of it, but very interesting topics, like if you just what ecosystem in India, for example, do we envision in 10 years, and how do we act accordingly to get to that place? Acceptance, more inclusion, female player population growth, we talked about player rights, but all those things, like, that's really interesting. And I think that's maybe also in the West. I shouldn't, again, preach in any way. It's a lot of work left to be done here. But it's very interesting to like think now when we have that opportunity, when esport is kind of established in a market like India and many other markets in the world as well, like what are we actually trying to build here? And are there things that happen in the origin when esport was coined and created that we should kind of revisit and try to return to, in a sense? I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, because both of you have obviously been in esport for a very long time, right? So I'm keen to get your thoughts as well.
Romeo, I can imagine a million tangents that we can go on from this, because he's mentioned so many things that I'd love to talk about. But I think the most important thing over here, the most important takeaway is definitely the fact that even though 10 years in general might not seem like a very long time, but in the world of esports, it's probably like 50 or 100 years. It's changed so quickly. It's like, I mean, the term as well, esports in general, like 10 years back, I don't think even now half of us don't spell it right, because it wasn't even a word. But you've covered a lot of points over here, but again, if we go back, I remember talking about this while we were, just having a discussion, that back in the day, even when you did have prize pools, whatever it was, you never really knew if you're going to come back with it or if you was going to get paid.
That's right. Been there, done that.
I mean, if there would be any big event, I remember when Dota International was announced, a lot of people on Reddit thought, that people are not going to get that money. Like, I remember a lot of the pros also saying, I mean, we'll go to Germany, but what if we never get paid then? I mean, I thought it was a joke because it was I think it was 250K, USD. And I was like, there's no way. And then bam, you see 1 million after a year. I think, less than a year.
Yeah, now, I think first TI was the 1 million, and today is 40 million. But that's a total price pool, I guess. But
so if you look at, let's go back to India for now, and I just want to ask you, like, I know you guys have been doing a lot of, you guys been here with PUBG before, and I wanted to ask you, like, what are your views on the Indian esports scene? Like, what made you really come here, and
Sure. I mean, first of all, we can just talk a bit about Fnatic's ambitions as a brand, which is not to centralize our business around one certain territory within one certain border or in one certain language. You will probably know and have seen this, right, in your own esport journeys, that Fnatic has been, we've been out there for like 15, 16 years at this point, but we have always also had an international approach, although it took us all the way into kind of the mobile era, which we're in very much now. And I think the mobile era will probably, remain, well, I think it will grow in proportion and grow in, market share of esport, broadly speaking, given, where it's big. The potential player population is also big, and that should yet render more money towards that, more attention, and then you have a spiral. But that's a little bit side topic. So back to Fnatic entering India late 2019. I mean, we've been in India before. I went there personally in 2007, long time ago. But yeah, it was great to connect with a bunch of people. I went to like Agra, New Delhi, Bangalore. My pronunciation is probably poor. Mumbai. I even wonder if it was called Mumbai then. You have something going on there where people
Bombay.
change names of cities. Yeah, Bombay. In any case, so my kind of direct connection, as in like being able to see things and touch things with my own hands and eyes, that's a bit outdated to say the least, because a lot of things have happened in those 13 years. But thankfully, thanks to the interwebs, bit learnings following COVID as well. We just spoke about this pre-show actually. You can still, I guess, render and generate a few thoughts, opinions, maybe some knowledge as well from that journey until date, which obviously started in a quite successful fashion, quite erratic fashion in a sense. Like, yeah, we in a quite short period of time saw an opportunity. We started to speak to the team that Scout was a part of. Paratosh was another member. Ronak was in that team as well. We speak about PUBG Mobile here, obviously.
Yeah.
And before we knew it, kind of we had a partner on board, OnePlus at that point, and we just started to get the ball rolling. And I think that was kind of, I don't have the graph in front of you. You guys can probably visualize this way better than I, but let's say October 2019 was probably just when it was already big growth, but it was when it was taking off even further, right? And we know that PUBG Mobile is a really great game. I mean, spectator-wise, player base, I played it myself mostly on PC, but I even enjoyed it on mobile. And the Indian population, you will know this better than I, but I'm just speculating, it was probably a good timing, all things considered, like access to 3G/4G, Wi-Fi. You have a lot of smartphone usage as well. And you maybe do not have the same kind of PC penetration that you have in the West, where people have maybe larger houses or fiber broadbands and just the PC background. So all things considered, it was just a lot of good data points suggesting that this is the right timing. Do I regret entering? Obviously now, given that we're not in India actively right now, I mean, we hopefully left a bit of a reputation, a bit of a platform to resume from later. I don't regret, although we have had a lot of challenges, both given that for the first time in our 16-year history, the game we were competing in just vanished overnight. I mean, that's a new one. That's quite exciting at the same time, that those things can happen. So it's almost like Messi rocks up in PSG now and like, well, sorry, mate, football cannot do it any longer. All right. I maybe think about another sports for myself. But I know it's funny and not funny at the same time, because obviously it took a hit, maybe create opportunities for other people like Free Fire. What do I know? But let's just say that our inability, because COVID just kind of became a pandemic at the same time, or roughly the same time, which prevented someone like myself and some of the other people in our HQ to travel down. Because what we still want to do, and we have endless of work to do in terms of that we can take more than we did during the PUBG Mobile era, all our learnings, the processes we have, the work we're doing in terms of performance management and innovation in terms of just how we approach the sport, setting up values, setting up goals. It was still a bit, I wouldn't say, if you just look at our silos of different titles, and if I just spontaneously try to rate them in terms of like, on the spectrum of, should I say professionalism, or rather like contribution in terms of like, you join Fnatic, we can add, just put a number there, 10% to your performance, 25% to your brand, whatever. PUBG Mobile obviously became the kind of weakest one in terms of like just relying on what was already there, with the financial support, aiding the team to get into boot camps, eventually gaming facility. But at the same time, given the distance, given the lockdown, everything was managed online. And we were also in the midst of setting up India as a business, like getting our merchandise out there, getting a gaming facility going in Mumbai, and so forth. You will know everything about this, but we experienced obviously a lot of challenges also from like a roster retention or roster harmony standpoint. A lot of player changes, a lot of drama, yet a lot of hype, a lot of excitement, right? And I do think some of the learnings would probably have been to like way earlier, or rather even before we put signatures on the dotted line to a contract, we should have maybe had a few more, let's say, defense mechanisms in place in terms of, this is a bullet point list on what we're actually going to do in terms of timeline. This is the goals we're setting for the team. this is how we set up maybe decision making. I mean, I'm not a guy that just points to like a certain hierarchy or org chart. I think everyone has a voice, everyone has an opportunity to contribute. It's a democratic sports, can be very democratic if you do it in the right way. Yet having leadership, I think, is important. I come from a certain school of in-game leadership of CSGO. CS 1.6, I should say. These days I speak CSGO terms, not CS 1.6. But again, we weren't able, as much as I like us to embed those learnings, those protocols, those values, those goals, etc. And education, I think that's a big one as well. Speak about going from nowhere to somewhere. PUBG Mobile is probably the most crystal clear example that I ever can think about in terms of esports, right? Yeah, maybe League of Legends at some point just exploded, right, in some way, taking over CSGO, CS 1.6 still, in terms of viewership and hype somewhere around 2009. And that just, I didn't see it happening, right? But PUBG is a different beast in itself. But yeah, maybe it can be some follow-up questions and go into some of the more details later, but very proud on what we accomplished. So at the end of the day, we are in the business of trying to level up players. I think we did. Did we do it perfectly? Did the players always abide and, deal with things appropriately? No, but it was also a very fast-moving industry during a pandemic, during a lot of hardship in many ways, and lack of benchmark, lack of maybe local role models that have been there, done that before. Because to some degree, you guys can shoot me down here and now, it feels almost like PUBG Mobile, and I'm probably missing some, let's say, niche titles right now, but PUBG Mobile probably still can, obviously now in the kind of battleground India format, be the chosen game where Indian esport can be shown on an international basis, because that's going back to the goal of Fnatic, is that we go to the markets, we select the appropriate titles, and they become our pro team. Then we build academy teams. Some teams does it in an introverted way. Optics, right? They went, let's do an academy team in CSGO in India. For me, that doesn't make too much sense. We felt more like, we're going to PUBG Mobile. It's big in India. This is going to be our pro team internationally. COVID happened, obviously roster challenges and all that, but I do think, and we still have maybe seen some signs of that PUBG Mobile might indeed be the title where Indian esport is shown on an international scale, an international scene, and maybe even winning gold medals. Because I don't think that has happened too much. And if you think about like player population versus international trophies, that's something we felt we could actually impact, and we will impact over time, because it's just a matter of time, right? Like a lot of things are happening very fast. We're seeing Sweden, small population, historically very good in Counter-Strike, but the reality is also catching up on us. It's a numbers game, right? And people catch up. Internet becomes more accessible. The learnings can be shared in real time in all sorts of languages, etc. But yeah, bottom line, a lot of learnings, and maybe we can touch on some of those more later, now when I end this monologue and grabbing a bit of water.
But no, Romy, he brings up a lot of important points, right? And talking about the number game, I'm not sure, CArn, if you're aware about these numbers, but 2018, 2019, these are the numbers from there. We have a population of 1.3 billion people. We've only managed to connect 500 million people to the internet so far. In 2018,
did you say,
yeah, and that's less than half the country which is connected to the internet. So mobile game, obviously, you mentioned PUBG can be the chosen game. If I remember this correctly, lads, anybody who's listening, all the listeners can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Entity Gaming. I think in the World League they were in the top 5. They didn't manage to make
I think they were, yeah.
Yeah, so they didn't manage to make an impact, but. Here's an interesting one for me. You mentioned merchandise, and this is something that Romy and we've talked about extensively, because at the end of the day, sure, we've always been passionate about esports, but it is also a business. We might not prioritize the business side of things when we think about it ourselves, but when you come to a country like India, where merchandising is something that has historically not worked, how do you tackle a problem like that? What's the idea with the ROI for an organization like Fnatic, and how do you tackle a problem like that in general?
Yeah, good one. The short answer is I don't fully know. I don't think we fully know, but we have learned our share amount of lessons in terms of, yeah, surely we can be excited about the growth in India, great opportunities, picking up some of the absolute best and most talented players in a quite early stage, but at the growing stage, and kind of being the team that is there to win it when it really, blows up, right? CSGO is a good example, winning the first major. It was big for us, set a lot of positive things in motion for us in the next decade. Same with League of Legends, winning the first Worlds in a sense, right? It was a different kind of Worlds in League of Legends back then when we won it in DreamHack 2011 somewhere. We felt like, yeah, let's jump on this. But again, the learnings would have probably been to wait a few more months, getting more visibility into the PUBG Mobile kind of esport plan going forward in India and globally. Setting up staff and infrastructure locally in a more, let's say, healthy structural way that also interlinks back with our HQ in London and other offices of Fnatic. Choosing the right merchandise partner. Not saying that we didn't do so, but I think work could have definitely been done in terms of that. But that being said, we have and still will go into titles all around the world. I mean, besides the pro gaming department, which I run for Fnatic, consisting of now like 6 titles and growing. It was a higher number before, but it's always been lower. This amount will grow over time, but also in the content creative department, the talent department of Fnatic, we're obviously engaging in many different titles. And it's not that we're expecting every title to just kind of on their own kind of wash the face and just makes us rich and like scale from just the direct revenues from the game, be it a prize money cut, be it attendance fees or league revenues. But we expect such to eventually come in, right? And we see great success in some cases in terms of like in-game items, media rights, sponsorship, etc. League of Legends is a great example. Rainbow Six is another one, I would say, in terms of the in-game item model. But that, in the absence of such, which is the case with PUBG Mobile, that stresses more the, let's say, and categorizes as indirect revenue. So a local sponsorship, merchandise, other revenues. And there was maybe a bit of an imbalance over that, or rather the head start we got in terms of getting a great team, getting on the bigger stages. We weren't, due to COVID, due to the same lack of structure and lack of connection between London and India. Eventually, when the game was eventually banned, we gave it a bit more time to see, it's probably coming back, let's resume, etc. But it was more like, now is probably the right time to pull out, in a sense, like letting these players go to other regions and put a pause to it. Now, in hindsight, I should have done that a bit sooner, because I think we kept people on payroll, which is completely fine. It was also tough for the players, right? But we kept kind of investing into the game that didn't exist, which is a bit weird, right? Because, the only thing we could play, I think, was, I don't know, like on other regions or thinking about relocating temporarily, which comes with challenges during a pandemic. But to answer your question, I think it's not that merchandise sponsorship needs to pay for everything from the get-go, but the lack of direct revenues and the complexity around sourcing indirect revenues locally, especially during COVID, especially in the launch phase, that contributed to the decision to, for time being, put a pause to India. But as we are returning in whatever shape and form that is, I think the fans out there should not only expect like us to support and level up great players and teams, content creators, but also to make our brand more accessible through content, campaigns, sponsorships, and hopefully physical products. And maybe do stuff more locally, because maybe we had a bit of naive view that it's just about sending it to India and let's sell it. But there is something called customs and local taxes, and they're protecting the textile industries and stuff like that. I don't have all those nitty-gritty details. I was quite involved in the region expansion, but that was mainly from an esports standpoint. But it's fair enough to say that from a brand building standpoint, all things considered, was a great exercise from a learning experience as well. But now, next time, it's better to do it in a way that even, which I don't think ever will happen, I hope that the game that you're playing and contributing towards is disappearing overnight, that we still have enough legs to stand on so we can continue. And going back to the kind of Fnatic goals is to level up players, and that is not restricted to just one single title. The fact is now we have probably been over the last 15 years in 40 different titles. But it's only really the last 10 years where people started to, kind of intentionally create esport titles. And I'm saying intentionally with a bit of emphasis, because Counter-Strike, to some degree, was an accident. It was based on Half-Life. Yes, Half-Life had a multiplayer component, but that was kind of what they used to build Counter-Strike. Dota is another interesting example. But then you had the League of Legends, the Overwatch, the Fortnites, the PUBG Mobile, which is, you don't really go and play it against the AI. Even when I say single player, people are like, okay, boomer, what are you even talking about? That was what people like myself grew up with, playing like Soldier of Fortune, or like, because this is a bit of an anecdote, but back in the day, so when I started, you had to use a dial-up, as in like a modem, to connect to whatever those systems called, and they charge you per minute. And in Sweden, we had something like after 6 p.m. in the evening, because maybe that telephone system was extra clogged during business hours. So they had a smaller charge. I think it was like $1 an hour, which actually is quite a lot of money in the late 90s. But I had to kind of hang out playing against bots, if I was even able to find bots, or playing single player just against AI in Quake, in order to warm up at 6 p.m., calling up to the modem, getting on the servers. I'm saying servers, you probably had to set up yourself. But anyway, just to kind of put a bit of color on how different it is today and how entitled some of you guys are out there. Where you suddenly have an iPhone or a OnePlus in your hand and like pressing play. And then like, oh, life is so tough. I have to wait 5 seconds for my next game. You know?
Oh, Lord.
This is exactly what we were actually discussing. Like the current generation actually doesn't know the kind of things we went through, like the travel, the prize money, so many events that turn out to be scams, and like knowing that, you know, you're not going to earn anything, but you kept playing because you love the game. But now, I mean, I do agree, a lot of people also play because they see I mean, some players would just, or some fans would just look at one IEM video or would watch an international video and be like, oh, I want to be pro. But they don't know how much of a struggle this industry had seen. Like, I mean, India, for an example, right? We've, like you said, it was like 2018. Yeah, I think PUBG Mobile kind of blew up. And now I think you guys have pretty much set the benchmark. I think there's a lot of international orgs that have come in, like TSM, FTX.
Yeah, and more to come. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of SEA teams coming in, like pretty good funded SEA teams coming in, and
Definitely.
So I think you guys did set a benchmark in that. Like, and a lot of people do take you guys as an example. Like, I've spoken to most of them, and they really, I think you guys also, I mean, what I really liked about Fnatic always was you guys always had superstars, whether it's League of Legends, CSGO. I mean, look at Valorant now. Like, to be honest, like, okay, like coming to Valorant, how also, like, what was your initial impression of Valorant, like when you saw it? Like, because you played Counter-Strike your whole life, and what was your initial impression?
I think it's a really good game, great game, and I think it's healthy just staying in the CSGO universe for a second, or other FPSs, that you have another kind of contender that has a very disciplined focus on esports first as a kind of product. And this is not to kind of like, you know, speak down Valve, because obviously they have, in one way or another, kind of created a lot of opportunities for someone like myself, Fnatic as a company. But yeah, they are obviously a bit more hands off in a sense. Surely giving licenses and supporting majors, and that has been some of the greatest moments in esports all time, right? Like the CSGO majors, I think there's few examples of hype, right? Maybe League of Legends Worlds, maybe a TI. So obviously all the kudos and respect to them. But it's great to have Riot Games also coming in now with, well, not only Valorant, but a few other titles, and it's like really thinking like esport product, building media properties out of it, sport media properties. I mean, obviously in different kind of shapes and form and different timings, because they're launching like 5 titles at the same time. Back to Valorant specifically. Let's just think for a minute. If I was Patrik 13 years ago, but access to the option of playing CS versus Valorant, I am pretty sure I would play Valorant actually, because it adds another layer. But I'm also speaking by kind of exporting the kind of current, I don't know, what people are looking for in terms of skins and, you know, different genders and stuff like that Counter-Strike doesn't have, or maybe they have these days in terms of I'm just saying that I spoke to one of our players recently as well. Like, in terms of accessibility, it feels like just Valorant has something extra, that they've really done their homework. They also spend a lot of time, probably a lot of money as well, developing the title. But you know what? Esport doesn't mean that the arrival of a certain FPS, even if it's very similar, in some case identical to Counter-Strike, one has not to you don't have to like exclude the other one suddenly. Like, they are equally relevant, I would say. Might even, like, again, slingshot from each other, because now the race is on in terms of attracting the same 13-year-old. But yeah, in terms of Valorant, we took our time. We hoovered the market. We were a bit uncertain. What is the right timing? Should we wait for more clarity from Riot in terms of what model they build over time? But then the opportunity of acquiring Summon FC appeared. Great work from our team management. Less me, but I was a little bit apart. But a guy called Colin, aka Kojo, started to speak to this UK-based team, although, yes, international, because they had a Greece player at that point as well. And some other nationalities. Anyway, things happen very fast. Anyway, so we in December start to finalize the negotiation with them. We announced it late January, and we went in a big roster change 3 months later. But that also catapulted us into a position of being one of the better teams, if not the best team in Europe. And we got second spot in Reykjavik, which I believe is the first, if you exclude the local lands in like Korea, whatever, that was the first global land in Valorant, which I very much, and for me, I'm not a religious man, but it was almost like, yeah, we won the first CSGO major, we won the first world championship in League of Legends, and now maybe if we just do our work correctly here against Sentinels, we're going to win. But then we lost 0-3. But anyway, I think we are well established. I think we, due to taking our time, also in comparison, I would say, to Fnatic support and influence immediately to PUBG Mobile in late 2019 versus entering Valorant almost this year, right? Very different. So the likes of myself have supported to some degree in terms of like in-game leadership. We have a high performance unit in Fnatic with performance coaches, performance director, fitness coach, etc. that has also been there. And that is obviously not to take away anything from the great talent, the great work that team in question had already brought to the picture, but our ability also aid the team captain, the head coach during times of change, because that's one thing we see. PUBG Mobile is a great example of that. Some other titles like Overwatch, some of the absolute best player in the first year, in the inaugural year, the first meta, if you may, of a title, it's not likely that these team or those players will be, they might even realize here later that this is not for me. And we have seen that in PUBG Mobile as well, right? Not to put names out there, but it's one thing to be successful early. It's another thing to replicate success over time. And these days I like to think about like, it's really hard to just get to the top. Then it's harder to kind of protect that. But what is even harder is when you fail to protect that, but get back at a later place, that you can kind of replicate success. And those are the kind of key traits I'm looking at. And I think a lot of that derives from humble leaders that are able to level up others and sacrifice themselves. And I think we had an issue in that PUBG Mobile wise. I don't think we have as big issue in that in Valorant because things are going in the right direction. But to say the least, right, it's a very young sport. So we really need to continue work really hard and be on the lookout constantly for like, yeah, great opportunities, great new things we can do for the team, relocating them to London post-pandemic and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm very, very happy. All things considered, the last esports titles that we have gotten into, PUBG Mobile is actually one. Valorant is another one. From a sports standpoint, is relatively successful. And I think that speaks a bit to the core and the values and the brand Fnatic is and what we can bring to the table for players out there. So I'm quite confident the moment we're going back to Battlegrounds India, Mobile India, sorry, or a Free Fire or a, I don't know, female team in Valorant in India, I think we're going to be successful over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but eventually it will.
I'm actually, this caught my attention of, we particularly mentioned a female team in Valorant in India. It could be a possibility. But hey, Patrik, you know what? We'll maybe get a question or two in quickly before we let you go because I know you have to leave. But this is one thing that we've been extensively talking about, and I think it's a very important question. It's not related to anything that we've covered, even though I have like a million more questions. But burnout. I believe this is something that we need to talk about on a very regular basis. The question for you is, how do you manage it in your own organization amongst players or the support staff, with yourself? How do you tackle that problem?
Yeah, I would categorize that important element or important support function as one that is under development and under discussion, because surely we have, myself at times, also hit the wall in terms of just burnout. Like I barely can get up from the bed in the morning. An off season that is very tough, big losses, multiple losses across the titles at the same time. Someone should have told me way earlier the challenges of running one sport teams, but think about that multiplied by 6. It's not the easiest all the time, but let's zoom in on the players because I think they're most prone to it due to age, due to being quite junior and growing up and becoming kind of, yeah, I'm referring to men because yeah, in pro Fnatic right now, we mainly have male, well, we have only male players, but work needs to be done on that too. In any case, it's very easy. We had a bit of a kind of, I don't know, cheerful tone and almost like a little bit entitled or a little bit boomer again, looking kind of not looking down, but yeah, looking down in terms of the generation behind us. Like what are the traits, entitlement, click and play. You don't have to like learn how to install a network card or travel with bus with a big desktop and a CRT monitor. But at the same time, what kind of pathway are we always leaving behind ourselves to the next generation? So how about looking yourself in the mirror in terms of that, right? So what would I have done now different, or what would I have done 5 years ago differently? I would had a more conservative approach to a pro player that early on gets into streaming and grows a big name for himself. In many cases, those are the individuals that would need the biggest support structure. But it's also very hard as a team because you can be perceived to be a bit biased in terms of like, what is your motives here? Are you worried about me growing out of proportion, stuff like that? But I see this repetitively, like players having certain success, getting a lot of fame, scaling that fame, starting to scratch their heads. How did I end up here? And where do I go from here? And the where do I go from here often, and as I spoke about earlier, like what is the reason why you're in it for the first place? And when you have that fame, you have those channels, you have that following, you have this reputation, you're bigger than life at some point in some cases, right? Are you then, is it easy for you then to kind of take a breather, step back, come back and be a great teammate? Being a great teammate is the most underestimated thing you can ever think about as a competitive player. That often gets lost because the headlines, and this is me speculating, but I'm happy I have two wise men in front of me here now, locally, that knows the culture, knows the local traits, know the kind of generation shifts and the generational differences. But it feels a little bit to me, maybe this is all in the world, goes for every country almost, where you have social media. It's also a bit accelerated by that, but this kind of like me first versus team first seems to be quite a trait in India, in a sense. Like it's very individual almost. Like I will be the flanker, I will be the one that gets the multi kills, I will be the driver of the car, I will be the one on this best position, versus just thinking in logical terms. So I, for example, people will have an easy time to relate to the name Forest and the name cArn, and I'm not trying to like put Forest in my shadow or anything like that, but I sincerely, genuinely knew he's a way superior mechanical player than myself. Should he have a equally good mechanical player next to him, I'm not sure if he would be as successful in a world where I would have taken a different role, as in like I facilitated certain things as an in-game leader, as a teammate, where here's my deagle, here's my AK. So this maybe again sounds like putting myself on a pedestal, but one of those big shifts that I see, and maybe I saw it more than I'm used to, during our time in India, which was very little around. But that was again, I'm looking at myself in the mirror at the same time. Like, did we even think about leadership? Did we even think about setting up team goals, team culture values? Did we put like a clear red line? This is what you do, or orange line. We're Fnatic at the end of the day. This is what you do in Fnatic, and this is what you don't do at Fnatic. Surely people can get a warning, people can get like penalized, whatever, and everyone can make a mistake. I do hundreds of mistakes probably every day. Ask my wife, is probably 1,000 mistakes. But anyway, the point is, we need, as organizations, need to do way better job in terms of like building leadership and building great teammates. And things got a bit carried away, I would say, in terms of PUBG Mobile. But that's just one example, right? We see this across the board. Other organizations are probably even suffering more from this, right? But just the simple principle that we are in a team-based game, it's almost like that gets a bit lost in the world of social media. Comments about your teammates, people whispering in your ear, there is this other opportunity in front of you that feels better right now because I just lost and someone did a mistake. But yeah, the best teams are, again, in my book, the ones that can have success, stay there, maybe lose it, but come back there. And that's what I think we generally have been really good at, but I don't think we set up that in the most optimal way in PUBG Mobile. But that, again, is not to take anything away from the great work that got in to that project from each and every member, each and every staff member, each and every player, each and every staff member. But I urge the ones that can have a more meaningful impact than myself right now, because we don't have a team there, but like, how do we actually set ourselves up for success in terms of sports? How does India become a world champion in a global esport title? Is that about having 100,000 YouTube concurrent, or is that about, that is not to shoot down streamers, right? Content is a big piece. I think esport is very colorful. Gaming is very you can have everything. Yeah. It encompasses everything. It raises border, hopefully, over time. But if you just, because I'm a sports guy, that's what I like to speak to, so I'm gonna kind of caveat what I'm talking about mainly on the sports side. How if we put more spotlight on the great teammates out there, because I'm sure you have a few, but I wonder if they always get the spotlight they maybe deserve. If I think in terms of a macro culture, macro future, issues around the corner from a our world in a sense, like what are the individuals that can actually solve? Is that collaboration? Is that a good trait, for example? Is that leadership and being humble about things? Is that those good things? Again, to be not trying to be political correct, but just trying to add nuance. We had a great bunch of all these things as well, but I think it was inconsistency that was a bit hard to deal with from a remote standpoint, sitting several time zones away, lost in translation. I mean, all speak the language that we work with, obviously, and yeah, English is one of the leading languages, if not the leading language. So that is not my point, but more like being on the ground and understanding the kind of fabrics of a team. That's a requirement. It's very hard to do that from remote. You can like sniff up and see and feel certain things from remote. But again, I love if I ever get the time to spend a year working very closely in a very new market and just learn from that, but also hopefully can help with some of those things as well. What are your thoughts to what I'm speaking about? Is it nonsense? Is this even a challenge, you think? Is the attention at the right place? What is even the right place? Because it's even entitled to say that's the right people that should get exposure. I even think like who actually cares about exposure, because it should be all about sport performance. But yeah, anyway, what goes in your minds when we speak about this subject, or I speak about this subject so far?
Romeo, do you want to go first? Because I have a lot to say about this.
You go ahead.
So you brought up a couple of brilliant points. I actually had this question. If we had more time, I would definitely ask you this. What do you think is more important, the sellability of a player when you pick a player, or is he a right fit? Because obviously, I think I know what your answer is going to be about this, but
I'm not sure if you know that actually.
Where is it?
Is it twofold? One is right now, fit, athletic characteristics should be the only identifier that we look at. But in a universe where obviously, the bills needs to be paid in a sense. Otherwise, we lose the internet connection in the house or whatever. Yeah. We struggle to actually pay salaries, whatever. So there's a business behind it. If there is, which is just theoretical, but let's say the athletical skills are similar between two players and we can only choose one, but also one player has a great following. That's obviously, then we go for the guy with following. But why I said you're probably a bit wrong is that for probably a way too long time, we probably segued a little bit into that more because we had a bit of I think still Fnatic lifestyle. We can contribute a lot widely to esport, but we have kind of redefined ourselves a bit, returning to the origin that I talked a bit earlier, like performance first. And you have to be quite brutal around that. Yeah. Brutal, not in the sense of being like aggressive and trying to like go after the people you don't really select and whatever, but just like being confident is probably the better word actually in terms of, defending those values and sticking to them at any given time, because you cannot trade that. Either you do it fully or you don't do it at all.
No, absolutely. No, I agree with this 100%. And that is something that I've believed in. But the reason why I said that you brought up a lot of valid points is, I think, again, the biggest problem you mentioned, right, is that they want to be the one who's taking the team across. It's me versus the team. It's putting themselves first. And I believe this is again, if I think about it from the top of my head, it's a deep-seated socioeconomic and a cultural problem, because even if you look at most of the Bollywood movies, right, they will always have a protagonist. They'll always have a hero. And they'll be like, you know what, this is the man that does everything. And that is something that we've noticed as well. I'm sure Romeo can add to this, but I completely 100% agree. And your observation on that is bang on point. It's bang on point.
So, I mean, I completely agree with Patrik. Like, I mean, if you had an option, like, I mean, if you look at Scout, for example, right? And if you had another example, let's say, I wouldn't name another player, but I do get how, I mean, you have bills to pay at the end of the day as an organization. And you kind of have to, if you're getting the best of both worlds or, best of every trait in a player, of course, you'll go for that player. I would just like to ask you something, of course, which is a little fun. Like I'm just gonna ask
Go ahead.
you. So, like, I mean, which was your best or favorite lineup when you competed? Like, other than the one you were in 1.6. Like, I always wondered what was your favorite like lineup back when you were competing.
I'm sorry, I'm complicating every topic, but from a competitive standpoint, in terms of just like, maybe at that point winning was very important to me. At another point in my life, this was a very short time span, but let's talk about 2008 where we had INS. We had Archie, I think, in the absolute beginning. We had a really great brotherhood. We were also kind of exploring the world. We explored ourselves in a sense. We were very young. Had ability to travel. Yes, there was a lot of work in terms of like going to tournaments and practicing, and at times getting some silverware back home, but also on the outside, like traveling to Los Angeles and having another tournament 2 weeks later somewhere else in America, just sticking around, living in Hollywood for 2 weeks. I mean, those are really fond memories. And actually now, in hindsight, when I look back, that's probably what I think about most first in terms of like esport. What has that meant to me? Is those relationships, is those moments together. Yeah. Yes, teleporting your mind into the moment when you raise a trophy. So 2009. Now when I speak about the past, I'm like 2019 feels easier on the tongue, but I need to think it really twice when I speak here. So 2009 is that far ago. We obviously had a super successful year as a team, and that was obviously some glorious moments together. But I would say more like personal development, interpersonal relationship with players, and just kind of getting closer to them and exploring the world essentially. That would be the 2008 lineup, because we kind of, if I'm not fully mistaken, with some fluctuations, but it was kind of like we settled on an annual team, but as kind of time went by, there was more options and things also went a bit more south, so there was faster change. But 2008, 2009 would be really, really fond. Also the latter part of my career, 2011, which was the tough year where we separated from Forest, Get Right, like people that I also like to call brothers. I mean, we are I'm saying super friendly. It's not that we send Christmas cards and spending Swedish midsummer together, but every time we had the chance, we catch up and have a lot of fun, sharing a beer, whatever. Well, or I buy them a beer. I'm the older guy, right? Anyway, I really love those guys, but that was the year we broke up and we had that rivalry. So we didn't have our most successful year, 2011, but we were able, a little bit to the same, I talk about Fnatic's value and how we want to do things, the work ethics, the way we approach the game strategically and all those things. We managed to, I think, secure 3 titles, 2011, which was actually a very competitive year. And we did it without Forest and Get Right.
Yeah.
But I want to, just hopping back a bit to kind of India and PUBG Mobile. You mentioned some players already. Like the important takeaway here I want to leave this with is, again, that we all have a choice in life in terms of like, what do we want to build? Who do we want to become? And I feel there was a disparity compared to now, but that's easy. It's always easy in hindsight, to the stuff we should have thought about and the stuff we should have done early on. So someone like Scout, I mean, isn't that like a massive success story? All things come together. I don't know exactly in terms of like sports achievements, but he has been on the highest level, eventually found his way to content creation, became one of the biggest names. A lot of controversy, a lot of drama, surely. We were part of that as well. But I'm back here looking myself in the mirror in terms of like, what could I have done differently? Who has not walked his path? Because I haven't grown up in India. I haven't played mobile esports, but some of those elements in terms of like, even if I got a little bit of fame or I had a dispute with a player, that was probably comparable, by the way, because there was probably the same volume and same challenges in terms of, cover my back, you fucking idiot, I'm defusing the bomb, whatever those things are. Well, I know you have a bomb. Maybe these days you have, actually. I think there's a C4 in PUBG. Anyway, what could we have done differently? And but he found his way to content creation. I think he's still maybe aspiring to come back to playing more competitively at some point. But very proud that we had the opportunity. But this obviously came with some challenges as well. And that goes for every player. But again, I cannot sit here now 2 years after and be like, we did everything perfect. We had this best onboarding. Patrik got into India and managed to meet these people and really like befriend, but like bring them into our organization and the values. I think we did some of that, but way less than we need to do and going forward. Hence why people might have heard us talk about we're going to return to India. We big fans of, mobile battle royale titles, but we don't feel the timing is right now, simply because not due to the lack of talent, great hard workers, great captains out there, but just that we don't feel that we can add enough value at this given point of time. Plus, obviously, the ability to run kind of a sustainable business where we don't rely on one single title because we are a multi-team organization. And so what I'm saying in short, I guess, is when we come back to India, that's a permanent thing. Might be in different games, different players, different staff members. I will grow old, but the kind of Fnatic spirit hopefully continues and remains on in one kind of line rather than like break, come back, because that's to some degree a failure. But it was some extraordinary circumstances. 2020 game banned, pandemic, but cannot blame that too much. But yeah, a lot of learnings nevertheless.
That it is, and a lot of great insights as well. So Patrik, I know you had to leave in a bit, so we really appreciate your time. A lot of great insights, and I still have so many questions. I'm really hoping.
Can I ask some questions instead?
For sure.
Yes.
What do you see the core? I mean, it's not a number thing that's said, but what are the core challenges, if it's a plural, that you see? Because again, it kind of also goes back to what do we want to build? Like, it's very easy to talk. Yeah, I'm this sports guy, like competitive. Esports should always be like that. Maybe it's not. Like we're forging the future together here, or not together in certain ways because people want to do other things. But let's change the question. Actually, where do you want India to be in the global esport ecosystem in 10 years from now, and how do you get there?
How do you start, Romeo? You work with the players.
Yeah. I mean, I think I pretty much got involved with a lot of players during my time in Garena, and I saw, because I was part of developing a lot of the South Asia region. So I'm not gonna take just PUBG as an example, because when we say esports as a whole, it's Free Fire, Clash of Clans, BGMI. I think the issues, because I spoke to a lot of orgs, like including Fnatic, a lot of other Western orgs, and I think they had the same question. They were like, what is that element, or what kind of traits do you look in 5 guys or 4 guys? And I always said, everyone outside of you will always look at Fnatic as Scouts' team or these 5 superstars. I think that's where we kind of, I wouldn't say go wrong, but I feel like you need a lot of local insights. Like, if you see some of the successful teams in India, they were not very popular. Like, they're not the scouts of the world, or
Yeah.
if you look at Free Fire, like, you'll see some of the teams that are dominating are people who are not very big in content creation. I think that burnout thing is really important here. Like, they cannot balance both. Like, for example, if you look at some of the let's say consistent winners, they are not content creators. I think that's why we keep discussing burnout, because when I was doing a lot of esports programs with Garena, most of the players were kind of missing their like past lives, hanging out with friends. They would say, I don't have an off season. And I think this is not just with orgs. I think even publishers here have a lot of work. What happens is the publishers are so excited with the growth that they forget that there needs to be an off season. This is not a shade to just one publisher. This is something the publishers here need to learn from the other Western publishers, right? And like I said, it's Fnatic or any other organization, Liquid or TSM, coming here will not change anything unless the publishers also understand that there needs to be a whole roadmap. Because I think we've had several discussions with you guys as well on roadmaps and how the publishers want to work with orgs. I think, first of all, the roadmap needs to have really consistent events, of course, and then there needs to be a break. But right now, if you look at the roadmaps, there's literally no breaks. Even if you get some of the best players together,
They want to get the content out.
Yeah. So you don't see that consistency. And I feel like in esports, since we don't have like a book where we could just open and just read it, and then like esports
This is how we do it.
So, and that's when we kind of fall off and we are not able to compare it to traditional sports. But I feel like in India, some of the mistakes that organizations usually do is go after some of the popular players, but then again, you later realize, oh wait, some of the best players are actually people who are not really popular. And that's when you need someone.
But that's the definition, right? Is this a game of popularity, or is it a game of winning?
So Romeo and I were just discussing, right? So the question one of the things that he mentioned, and I agree with that, is a lot of times when teams come in from organizations coming from outside, local insight is so important. You need to have a couple of people, not just one or two, but a bunch of people who are going to be able to navigate the Indian esports industry as a whole and guide you to the right place. Because I'll give an example. Romeo again mentioned that a lot of times organizations come and pick up the superstars of the most prominent names, and they expect the performances. Again, it's a lot of interconnected problems: burnout, player culture, just the approach in general as well, popularity. How does that affect the player? But again, I've been casting a lot of Free Fire in the last 18 months. I've practically cast every single official event there was. And some of the best teams have come in through open qualifiers.
Yeah.
Absolute no-namers 6 months back. And now they're winning every tournament there is. If I had to name one, there was Captains. There's a team called Captains. I still remember interviewing them for the first time for a shoot that I was doing for the Free Fire esports circuit. And you could feel the desperation to win. And again, at the end of the day, this does compound along with the problems that eventually happen when you grow popular and whatnot. But I think organizations really need a bunch of people who will take 6 months, maybe a year, navigate the entire ecosystem in and out, and then maybe get into it. And after you get into it, spend 2 or 3 years without any expectation of, major breakthroughs. Because right now, I think consistency is the name of the game. If you can manage to last in India, or a region like India, which has so much population and still so much room for growth for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and even 2 years, as a matter of fact, eventually it is going to get to a point where you don't really have to do anything. Everything just falls into place.
I agree with all that. But again, that's from the definition that success is rendered and primarily rendered from sports success. As in, like, it's a little bit depends, because if the big media's game publishers are like seeing, and Romy, you will know this, but it's probably also very confidential, and you should treat your previous employers in the most delicate way, needless to say. But if there's evidence suggesting that the volume of downloads and microtransactions are accelerated mostly from like content creation, influencers, and less so the performance content, let's say the last circles when no-namer teams are just battling it out. That's where I'm not sure. But again, it's a coexistence thing, right? Like, one thing does not have to exclude the other. But I'm more like eager to understand more like, in 10 years now, because again, one of our objectives would be go into India, learn from it, and definitely take up the point you raised in terms of numerous staff members to have a wider spectrum, perhaps, of opinions, whatever. Because to some degree, decision making on roster still sat with myself and Victor, the team director, at that point. And that's a flaw. I think we can come in and like kind of fact check. We can refer to things in our data register. We're like, this is a similar situation. That worked. We learned from that, blah, blah, blah. But that was a flaw in our system. But back to the sports success. Like, how do we make a world champion out of India? I mean, pardon me if that has already happened. It probably happened in some of the early esport titles, but more like a team-based tier 1 esport title today. That is very interesting to me, because that's again, speaking about goals, that we want to come in and learn, level up, but eventually take that team not only to local fame and popularity, even success, but obviously go on a global stage. Because that would make me very happy when I one day kick the bucket and retire, whatever, that I can say that, we managed to get a world-class world champion team out of India. We're working on that in Southeast Asia. We got quite close in Dota. I think 2016, we got 4th in TI. Quite good performance, but not good enough. But back to that, like sports success internationally.
I think I might just have a different take on that. I mean, sure, it would be great to have a team which is a world champion from India. But if I look at the Indian ecosystem right now, the way it's grown in the past year, I think even if you limit yourself to India as a self-sustainable ecosystem, right?
I agree on that, by the way. I agree on that. Yeah.
So you can look at India as a self-sustainable ecosystem and just focus on the presence in India itself, because eventually I'm sure we are going to have a team with the right support and with the right mindset and the right approach and the right values that will go out and conquer the world. But up until that point, I think India can be looked at as a self-sustainable ecosystem.
Not to complicate things, but then also what defines it. Because again, if the end goal on the player journey starts with countryside boy getting his first smartphone, or a girl, doesn't matter, starting to grind the ladder, get scouted, we help. Very egoistic now, but I'm just saying Fnatic. What is the end of that spectrum in terms of that success story? That's,
absolutely.
Surely national champion, really big. It's a big nation. It's very competitive. But obviously at the end, it's kind of like qualifying to Olympics, then winning Olympics. That's kind of what I'm...
I think that's fair. I think we can go on and on about this, honestly.
But
we can go on. But Patrik, I think we're going to let you go after this. So again, once again,
likewise, it's me just spamming ideas and thoughts here. But anyway, thanks for having me.
And I think the best part, the best thing that if you want insights, I think, and I'm not saying this because I'm doing this with Romeo and he's a good friend, but he's been around for a very long time in India. So I'm sure he's going to be the right person to at least find you the right people to get insights in the country. Because again, there have been instances where people have tried and failed. But then again, that's a conversation for a different time. Hopefully the next time you're back on the podcast.
We love it.
Yes.
Thanks all for great work and thanks for having me.
Patrik.
And take care, guys. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.